Welcome to the 80s with me, your pal Jamie Fenderson. Today we're going to talk about 1987, and the first thing we need to talk about is na 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 na. That's right, Star Trek: The Next Generation. It premiered in late September of 1987, and I loved this show. If you've ever heard our shows in the past, you'll know what a Trekkie I was. This was my space family. This was more than a show to me. This was a way of life. And I think for a poor kid in a single mom family in a kind of a rough area, this was really a weekly escape for me. There's a number of articles, too, that pointed out that the show had a lot of strong male role models, which I think we needed for Gen X boys and young men. These were my TV dads, my TV uncles. The show won 19 Emmys, 2 Hugo Awards, and a Peabody Award, and 6 Saturn Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award this year for the entire cast. Admittedly, the first season was a bit awkward as the show tried to find its footing, but it improved drastically over time, and improvement is all anyone can ask for, right? It had well-written, engaging episodes, and kudos to the writers, kudos to all the production staff for the set design, costumes, makeup, model work, and special effects. I still have all the TNG action figures in my studio. I'm looking at them right now. Here's a few pieces of TNG trivia for you I learned as I was looking into the show more recently. The sliding doors were actually really loud when they opened and closed on the set. And you can see this if you watch the raw behind-the-scenes outtakes. Thus, the actors were instructed to never start dialogue until the doors opened and closed completely. So next time you watch an episode, you won't help but notice this. You're welcome. And then something else I didn't know, the visor was improvised on the first day of shooting using a car air filter and a hairband. That's kind of cool, right? And if you want to geek out a little bit, Data's own diagnostic states he has a storage capacity of 100 petabytes. So to put this into perspective, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Facebook store an estimated 1,200 petabytes. So Data alone has about 8.3% of the storage capacity of the 4 largest internet storage companies. So if you were wondering about that, you now know the truth. You're welcome. So Star Trek: The Next Generation paved the way for many science fiction shows going forward, including spin-offs like Deep Space Nine and Voyager. And they recently rebooted the whole thing with Picard, but I didn't watch it. I don't want to watch modern rated R Trek and see them bastardize my TV family. So if you know about that show, good for you. I know nothing about it. I'm in the dark, and that's where I want to be. Anywho, I could talk about Star Trek: The Next Generation for hours, so let's talk about what else was going on in television in 1987. So the Fox TV network made its primetime debut. So this is the first time since 1955 that there were 4 U.S. networks with primetime programming. It debuted with 2 shows. The first one was Married with Children. I love this show. It's kind of an anti-sitcom following the dysfunctional Bundy family. And that would go on for like 10 seasons. And then the Tracy Ullman Show. So this would last 4 seasons, but the most notable for this show is the first appearance of The Simpsons. So they kind of looked weird. They were just kind of like in these little animated shorts. But The Simpsons would go on to have their own show and become a pop cultural phenomenon. It's still on today, so this is where The Simpsons started, on the Tracy Ullman Show. And then the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cartoon debuted this year, and it would go on to become a cultural phenomenon itself. And I loved this show. I had all the toys, and I would draw all the characters, and I love this show. And we have a whole podcast about TV shows that debuted in 1987, so check that out. So there was an incident where R. Bud Dwyer, he shot and killed himself at a television press conference. And some companies broadcast footage, resulting in a big debate regarding journalistic ethics. So Robert Bud Dwyer was a Republican politician from Pennsylvania. And in 1986, he was convicted of accepting bribes from tech companies in California to get them contracts. So he was found guilty on 11 counts of conspiracy, mail fraud, perjury, and racketeering. And he arranged for a news conference at the Pennsylvania State Capitol building the day before his sentencing on January 22nd, 1987, and fatally shot himself in the head with a .357 Magnum revolver in front of all the reporters. So that suicide was broadcast live to many viewers in Pennsylvania on one station. And so there was a TV controversy about this because many TV stations in Pennsylvania taped the footage of the suicide. And the stations had to show the editors had to decide how much they wanted to show about this in the news. So many stopped action just before the gunshot, and some continue with audio with a freeze frame. And when it went to national news, NBC and CNN only showed Dwyer holding the gun. And then CBS and ABC didn't show any of the footage at all. So this incident kind of sparked a whole debate on how much to show something like that on TV. And maybe it's still a debate today. And since Dwyer died in office, his widow could collect the full survivor benefits of $1.28 million, which is like $3.5 million today. And the thing is, this was the largest benefit payment ever made by the Pennsylvania Municipal Retirement System. And if he was to be sentenced the next day, those benefits would have been null and void. So, just saying, his family goes on to say that he didn't do it because of the benefits and stuff, but I think you can kind of make your own opinion there. So let's move on from the small to the big screen. The first film I want to discuss is The Princess Bride. This is another one of those perfect 80s movies. I absolutely love this film. I can watch over and over and over and over again and love it just the same. And what's there not to love? It's got adventure, swashbuckling action, romance, and comedy. It's actually a very funny film with so many phrases that are still used today. And if you haven't seen this film, that's inconceivable. It's directed by Rob Reiner with a screenplay by William Goldman. The film was only a modest success, actually, and kind of flew under the radar in 1987. But it would slow burn into a bona fide classic over the years. So here's some trivia bits I learned about The Princess Bride. So the leads, Carrie Ewells and Robin Wright, I guess they were kind of smitten with each other. So a lot of that on-screen amorous energy was the real deal. And the film was shot on the British Isles, and it rained a lot. And word has it that Andre the Giant would hold his hand over Robin Wright's head to keep her dry. That's how big his hands were. I looked into it, and his hands were 16 inches in size. For comparison, like, here's some objects that are also 16 inches. So an average car rim, a bowling pin, the length of a bowling pin, and an extra large pizza. Those are some big hands. So word also has it that director Rob Reiner had to leave the set during Billy Crystal scenes because he just couldn't stop laughing. Because Billy Crystal's a funny guy. Anywho, I think this was a fantastic movie, and I love it. So because it's me, we have to cover the sci-fi and fantasy and horror genres of 1987 because I'm geeky like that. Let's talk about RoboCop, directed by Paul Verhoeven. I consider myself somewhat of a satirist, and I think this is the biggest satire of the 1980s. So RoboCop was the most violent action film of the 1980s, and it satired the excess of the 80s. So everything became privatized in their future by soulless corporations, omni-consumer products, and they had dumbed-down media, like everybody's laughing at, I'd buy that for $1, and they had yuppies and coke and hookers and murder and ultra-violence and market worship and profits at the bottom line at the expense of culture. So to prove Verhoeven was right in every way, it's very meta, in a very meta way. The 80s made RoboCop like a RoboCop cartoon and RoboCop toys, And they were marketing the most violent rated R action film of the decade because it was the 80s, which is exactly what RoboCop was satirizing. So I think it's probably one of the best satires ever made because the time that it was in proved itself. Another iconic sci-fi action film of 1987 was Predator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers and Jesse Ventura. It's a great film. It's about an alien hunting an elite special forces group in the jungle, and it would go on to become a franchise with multiple sequels and reboots. And a little bit of trivia there of all of Arnold's action movie one-liners. "Get to the chopper" was his favorite. And then another one-liner where he impales one of the bad guys with a machete and he says, "Stick around." That was improvised. And the Predator itself, the alien, only had 8 minutes of screen time. That's how good the alien design was because it's so memorable. But the alien itself only had 8 minutes of screen time. So let's keep talking about Arnold. He was really busy in 1987 because he was in another science fiction action film called The Running Man. And it also stars Jesse Ventura. So this film is interesting because it's based on the 1982 novel and set between 2017 and 2019. It's about criminals. They have to escape death in this kind of televised gauntlet. And although, 2017 to 2019 wasn't as brutal and dystopian as this film, it did you did kind of see the rise of reality TV and reality competition. So it kind of forecasted that in a way. Now let's talk about Cannon Films. So Cannon Films was a production company that was synonymous with like low budget, high energy movies. And they released 2 films this year. Both were critical and financial disappointments, which kind of helped Cannon's demise a few years later. But I'm going to defend these films. And the first one is Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. So Superman takes it upon himself to rid the world of nuclear weapons. But Lex Luthor creates Nuclear Man as a nemesis. If you think this film is not good, I'll give you that. I'll give that to you, especially with the whole Christopher Reeve Superman stop motion rebuilding the Great Wall of China with his I-beam scene. That's pretty ridiculous, but yeah, I get it. But this movie is campy fun, and I've rewatched it, and like I said, if I can rewatch it, I'll defend it. And then the next Cannon film that came out this year, 1987, was Masters of the Universe. If you think you don't like this movie, go watch it again and open your heart. It's a lot of fun. It stars Dolph Lundgren as He-Man, and people criticize his acting, but he's a warrior barbarian from another planet. So how much of a thespian do you really want in that role? Dolph is good. He looks like He-Man, and Frank Langella as Skeletor was great, and he's got hammy greatness, and it's got a young Courtney Cox. Fun action, rewatchable, and I think it's good, and I defend it. So I suggest you go rewatch Masters of the Universe and tell me it's not a fun movie. There's a documentary called Electric Boogaloo about Cannon Films. That's one that's on my watch list. They're a really interesting company and a very culturally significant. Let's talk a little bit about monsters. So Clive Barker's Hellraiser was released in September 87. I didn't know that this was a British movie. It's about hedonists who open a puzzle box to another realm with sadomasochistic demons called Xenobites, including the iconic Pinhead. So they had to change some of the scenes because to even get a rated R movie rating, it's crazy. That's a pretty disturbing film. It would spawn 10 more sequels and reboots. And then The Lost Boys came out in the summer of 87, about California vampires, starring Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. It's directed by Joel Schumacher before he started making bad Batman movies. It's very cool and launched kind of that youthful, sexier vampire genre. And this was Corey Haim and Corey Feldman's first film together, starting the two Coreys film trend of the 1980s. We have a whole podcast episode about the two Coreys, and I suggest you check it out. It's pretty good. And then The Monster Squad. That was a fun horror comedy. It's about a group of kids, because it's always about a group of kids in the 80s who have to keep, these kind of universal monsters or pastiches of them from taking over the world. It's a fun movie, especially if you're a kid. So let's keep talking about sci-fi and fantasy comedies. In the 1980s, I have to mention this one. It's Harry and the Henderson. because it was filmed like right in the area where I live. So it's about a suburban Seattle family who adopts a Sasquatch. It's starring John Lithgow. It's a fun and sweet movie, and I have to mention that because it's literally filmed in the area that I live. And then let's talk about Inner Space, directed by Joe Dante of Gremlins fame, starring Dennis Quaid, Martin Short, and Meg Ryan. It's a great sci-fi and great comedy. So Dennis Quaid is in this pod that shrinks to be microscopic, but he's actually accidentally injected into Martin Short's body, and they go on an adventure of danger and mystery. But it's funny because Dennis Quaid, he's able to manipulate Martin Short's body, so he could do a lot of physical comedy. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great mix of sci-fi and comedy. I think this movie isn't talked a lot about these days, so I'm just bringing up this film again, and I suggest you watch it if you haven't seen it. And now let's talk about the king of all sci-fi comedies, Spaceballs. Spaceballs, watch out! It's written and directed by the great Mel Brooks, starring John Candy, Rick Moranis, Bill Pullman, Joan Rivers. It's a fantastic and funny spoof of the science fiction film genre, and it pokes fun at Star Wars, Star Trek, Alien, and even The Wizard of Oz. It's amazing to me that this movie has mixed critical reviews. It's a great movie, and I guess Mel Brooks wanted to have it as authentic of a spoof as possible and got George Lucas's full permission to parody anything he wanted to. And I guess Lucas really loved the movie, but here's the deal, like Lucas said, you can't do any merchandising. So that's where this yogurt scene where in the Dinks they have this whole merchandising scene, that's where that came from. And Rick Moranis is so funny, he improvised the whole doll scene, which was not even in the screenplay. And then John Candy is so funny, so that scene where he's trying to stand up with the seatbelt still like clicked in, he says, "Oh, that's gonna leave a mark." That was all ad-libbed. So this movie is so much fun. Another one I could watch over and over and laugh and laugh. Now I'm gonna talk about music, and I'm not gonna talk about Michael Jackson and Bad and Prince's Sign of the Times and Whitney Houston's Whitney and George Michael's Faith, because I've already talked about these pop stars so much. No, I'm gonna talk about metal. That's right, rock, heavy metal, glam metal, thrash metal. So I had a cousin, I might have told this story before. She lived in the trailer next to my grandma's trailer, and she was all about metal. She had the hair, she had the posters of the hair bands all over. And when we get the list of like records we shouldn't play backwards from my grandma, we'd be like, "All right, grandma, thanks for the list." And then we go next door and ask April if she had any of the records so we could play them backwards. We have a whole podcast about the Satanic Panic with our friend Tig. You should check it out. But first, we got to talk about one of the greatest rock albums of all time, Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, released on July 21st, 1987. And it had a number of awesome tracks, including Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City, Night Train. It was initially slow to gain traction until the release of Sweet Child of Mine as a single. And then it's since sold over 30 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling albums of all time. It's raw, rebellious, and unapologetic. It's full of energy, and I love it. And it highlights Axl Rose's vocal range, so he can shift between high-pitched screams and tender tones all in the same song. He's a really talented rocker. And then Def Leppard's Hysteria came out on August 3rd, and they had a blend of hard rock with kind of more glossy, harmonious, radio-friendly sounds. And tracks include Pour Some Sugar on Me, Love Bites, Animal, Hysteria, and Armageddon It. And it sold 25 million copies, also making it one of the best-selling albums of all time. So during this album's recording, the drummer Rick Allen lost his left arm in a car accident. But you can't stop rock. So they designed a special drum kit just for him, and he kept rocking. So let's talk about Motley Crue. Their album Girls, Girls, Girls released this year, and it was pretty cool. Definitely glam metal, but kind of edgier than their previous work. And it's all their songs are about reveling in the debauchery and excess of the 1980s glam rock scene. And it was based on real life. In fact, Nikki Sixx overdosed on heroin and was declared dead for 2 minutes. But then he was revived. And then it seemed like hair bands like to name themselves after albino animals. You had Whitesnake, which released an album called Whitesnake. which includes Here I Go Again on My Own, which is now an anthem for like recently divorced middle-aged men. This was my theme when I got divorced like many years ago. And you had White Lion released Pride in 1987, and they had a lot of Social Chain songs for like a glam band compared to most other glam bands at the time. And songs include When Children Cry, and the song Wait became big after their popular MTV music video dropped. You remember that video? I like White Lion a lot. And then Great White released Once Bitten. My, once bitten, twice shy, baby. Remember that song? I didn't know what this phrase meant until now. It means that like you had a bad experience and then you're more cautious and hesitant in a similar situation. That's what being once bitten, twice shy means, by the way. And I just learned that. So let's combine events and technology and talk about Black Monday. So on October 19th, 1987, global markets crashed, with the Dow experiencing its largest one-day percentage decline in history, dropping by almost 23%. And the crash wiped out billions in market value in just a few hours. And one of the major causes was the rise of computerized trading, or program trading, where large volumes of stocks were sold automatically based on certain market conditions, which sounds pretty normal now, but in 1987 that was all pretty new, and I don't think they were quite ready for this. So the loss surpassed even the 1929 black stock market crash that triggered the Great Depression, but it was less damaging than initially feared long term. Especially compared to like the 2008 recession, which was a more systematic problem. So later they introduced circuit breakers, these mechanisms that automatically halt trading if the market drops by a certain percentage in a single day, to prevent these kind of panic-driven sell-offs. I think they're probably still in place today. So let's talk a little bit about food and beverage history. So here's a few things. I didn't even know these were founded in the 80s. Panera Bread was founded as St. Louis Bread Company by Ken Rosenthal and grew to 20 locations. And then it was acquired by All Pon Pain in 1993 and rebranded as Panera in 1997. And now anybody can get their $30 baguette and cup of soup in so many locations. I like Panera. It's got good, simple ingredients. It is kind of spendy, but it's pretty good, and I like it. And then Red Bull officially launched in Austria and focused on creating kind of a lifestyle brand and not just a drink. It was targeting young people and like extreme sports enthusiasts. But it has its roots in Thailand. So it's got this drink kind of has its roots in the 70s in Thailand, and was kind of initially made for truck drivers, give them an energy boost, I guess. It's kind of interesting, right? So there's only one book I want to talk about, and that's a book called Hatchet by Gary Paulson. So it's a gripping book. It's for young readers. It's like a young reader's novel about a 13-year-old boy named Brian who is stranded alone in the Canadian wilderness after a plane crash. And Brian's arduous journey of survival faces him with like harsh realities of nature and hunger and cold and wild animals. And he only has a gift from his father, which is a hatchet. It's the only thing he has. And he has to use that in his own resourcefulness to survive. So he grapples with fear and loneliness and self-discovery. So this book flooded school curricula in 1987. And if you were a reading age school kid in 1987, you probably read this. Actually, my school teacher, Mrs. Hawthorne, would read to us for a set period of time. And she had this really awesome reading voice, and she'd stop right at climaxes and we'd all go, oh. So I'm convinced she did this as kind of a teaser trailer to get us to read the book. And it totally worked. It's a great book. And incidentally, my son read this book as part of his school curriculum. So it's definitely a classic. So that's it. 1987. I'm out of here like Canon Films, which would eventually go bankrupt due to overexpansion, poor management decisions, and the 90s. I'll see you in 1988.